Coming up, the Ipswich property market is red hot, with an expected tsunami of buyers waiting to come to Queensland when the borders open. On the show, 3 experts in their respective fields, 2 with a combined 60 years plus experience in selling real estate, and we hear views from the Greater Springfield and Ipswich Chambers of Commerce. It's Tuesday, November 30, 2021, and I'm Alan Roebuck. Welcome to Ipswich Today, which acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which it is produced and pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. This podcast is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. Who would have thought the pandemic would contribute to the current boom in property prices across Australia? Finance guru Alan Kohler said housing needs a major reset free from politics. But what is the situation in Ipswich? To take the pulse of Ipswich property prices, I'm joined by a panel of experts. Neil Coupland is the principal of First National Real Estate in Springfield and has been selling property for more than 30 years. Neil is also Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce President. June Frank is Director and Manager of Walkers Real Estate Ipswich and has been selling property for 31 years. And Phillip Bell, Ipswich Chamber of Commerce President, and is a Senior Manager with a major bank. Each interview was recorded separately during the past few days with a similar set of questions. This episode takes the current pulse of the property market right across Ipswich, from the well-established suburbs to the now familiar newer developments in Ripley Valley, Redbank Plains, and the suburbs around Springfield Central. I'm joined by an expert in his field. It's Neil Coupland. He's the principal of First National Real Estate in Springfield and also president of the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Ipswich Today, Neil.
Thank you, Alan. Happy to be here.
Thanks for agreeing to take part in this very important discussion. I don't think there's been a time in living memory where the price of real estate has been front and centre in the media almost daily and impacting on our daily lives. Firstly, I want to ask, have you seen anything like this in your experience?
No, this is the short answer to that. I've been a real estate agent for 37 years. I've seen some booms and I've seen some busts, but nothing like this is. I mean, we've seen houses run out the door in, like back in 2003 and places like that. We had, stuff was running out the door, but we're just getting now. I mean, I take one house that we've just recently sold. We put an extra 20,000 on from what we thought it was going to sell for. It sold for 50 grand above that. We had 26 people to an open house, wow. 13 offers. So it's an insane market. But I think it boils down to people. There's a bit of fear of missing out with some people. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just a culmination of interest rates being so low and lack of stock that's driving the marketplace.
So how hot would you describe the market?
Red hot.
Scorching.
Scorching. The only thing is in other booms, we've actually sold more properties than we've sold in this boom, but I've never known a boom where it's so difficult to get stock, because a lot of investors are selling properties, but a lot of your owner occupiers don't want to sell because they can't find anywhere to go. So there's a little bit of, there's a huge lack of stock in the marketplace.
So we've covered off residential property just now. Does this have a flow-on effect to commercial property prices?
Commercial property prices, I don't do a lot of commercial. We do a little bit, but it's certainly, pre-COVID, commercial was doing quite well. And then when COVID hit, commercial took an absolute bucketing, but it seems to have made somewhat of a recovery. Rents, the vacancy rates are down compared to what they were. Prices are probably a little bit more reasonable than what they were, but that will be the next stage as that marketplace gets tighter with stock, then that will push the values back up again.
The REIQ has been quoted this month as saying that first home buyers account for about 3,000 homes statewide. Ipswich has long pushed the affordability mantra, but with Ipswich prices increasing, is the city still affordable for first home buyers?
Yes, it is. And the reason it is Ipswich prices tend to be lower than Brisbane prices. So consequently, it's that ripple effect from the Brisbane CBD, in a way. As the further you come out 5, 10, 15 Ks, and the price starts to drop down as you come out from that thing. So Ipswich the advantage Ipswich has is very affordable. So we've had a lot of investors buy in the region, but it will be, as Brisbane prices get higher and hotter, people are being forced back out to Ipswich, and it's generally what happens. So I think that when Brisbane starts to cool, Ipswich will take a bit longer to cool.
For many decades, Queensland was considered the place to be. Brisbane was one of the lowest price capitals. Now it's right up there. So we just talked about how that has a flow onto Ipswich. Does that ripple effect go out further past Toowoomba? Does everyone get affected?
I think absolutely. I mean, it becomes there's a lot of land being sold out in Fernvale and places like that. Walloon and those. Not that I deal in those areas, but I look at what's been sold. From Springfield, Springfield was almost the end of the line for a lot of people. Now it's Ripley and beyond, so the prices in Ripley are going gangbusters the same as they were. I mean, Ripley prices now are probably what Springfield prices were a couple of years ago.
A report in this week's Courier Mail by Christopher's Housing Boom or Bust said that prices would continue to increase between 8 and 14%. Can this continue, and how are people going to afford a mortgage if that continues?
Well, the second half of that is I think it is going to continue somewhat. I think that we'll start to see probably mid next year, I think we'll start to see a little bit of December 17, as we spoke about off air, when everything opens up, it'll be interesting. I mean, there have been people buying properties interstate without viewing it or getting a family member, or a friend to look at it. And we do a lot of stuff walking around with a phone, showing people.
That's hard to believe.
I think, yeah, well, it is, but I think that when people can come back up here, there will be another spike when people can come back. So that's why I think for the next 6 months, real estate will stay pretty solid in the Ipswich region, and that. But it's all to do. I think the Reserve Bank are itching to put interest rates up, but I don't think that will happen until probably the end of next year. Is my take on it.
It's always a difficult prediction here.
Yeah, but I think I think they'll try and put it up and just to test the market. Yes. I think obviously they want to put the interest rates up. They need to get it up to around that 3%. But because there are people still coming back to work, people coming out of lockdown, it would put too much hardship on those people to look at interest rates, I believe, now. So that's why I think they'll wait till the end of next year.
If we can switch to rentals just for a second, there's an increasing amount of attention being paid to rental prices, many families being forced to move simply because they can't afford to rent where they are. How would you describe the rental market at the moment in Ipswich?
Well, it's almost equally as hot as the sales market. Not quite, but we've had the case where most properties have gone up in I suppose around Springfield, and I have another office towards Brisbane so as well. But we've seen rental property, rents going up between $20 and $50 a week.
So what's happening with people who just say, I can't afford that? What are they doing? Do you know where they're going?
Basically, they're a lot of them. We're not finding a lot of people that say they can't afford it. They scream and yell they don't want to pay the rent, but they wanted the lifestyle and they want to be in a certain area. And, a lot of this is driven by schools and things, electric rail, and things like this, the amenities you get. But, like if you're, for argument's sake, if you're living in Springfield and you want something cheaper, you go out to Redbank Plains and you can buy some, or rent something there, probably $30, $40 a week less. And the facilities are not that detrimental that you're going to get there.
What is it, a 10 or 15 minute drive?
If that.
Yeah. Are there any secret pockets in Ipswich where prices have not increased or have only had modest increases?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that
if you were, you'd be onto it.
Yeah. No, I think Redbank Plains has been an area where prices probably haven't gone as much as some of the other as much as the likes of Springfield. Mm-hmm. But again, I suppose it boils down to a popularity type thing. Is when But that's where I think the next wave is going to come with those suburbs that have only gone, I say only, we're talking at a marketplace that's gone up some 20, between, 18 to 22%, where somewhere like Redbank Plains has probably only gone up 15%, but I think it'll catch up over the next 6 months.
Can we talk about government incentives for a second now for first home buyers? Do you think the government incentives actually push home prices up by a similar amount when they're announced?
Absolutely. Well, I think that the government incentives push prices up beyond what the incentive is. When they brought out the $25,000, 18 months ago, when they brought out 15 months ago, they brought out the $25,000 if you built.
Yep.
I mean, basically they gobbled up all the land. Land prices went through the roof. The cost of building went through the roof. So it more than went up. And that I don't know the cases of some land that sold in Brisbane. That when that happened, there was some land that was on the market. They withdrew it from the market and then they put it back on at 75 grand more and sold it all the weekend.
Incredible.
Wow. So for a 25 grand grant. So
yep.
I think some of these government grants push pricing up.
As we come to the end of 2021, and you've kind of touched on this already, let's look ahead to next year and beyond. Can you say with any certainty what will happen with property prices and affordability?
I think affordability will get a little bit worse before it gets any better. And I'm not sure that it's going to get a lot better. I mean, if you take property values, in comparison to wage growth, there's no comparison. I mean, wage growth is going up at 2.5% per annum type of stuff, where property's going up at 20% per annum. I'm not sure that in most cases that having a 10% wage increase is sustainable either for businesses coming out of where they are. So I think affordability is going to get harder before it gets better.
And finally, we'll get you to put your president hat on for the Greater Springfield Chamber of Commerce, and a couple of comments perhaps from a business perspective. Have local businesses bounced back after nearly 2 years of COVID?
I think a lot of businesses are doing okay. I think there's still a great deal of uncertainty. And as we alluded to off air, the 17th of December looms large. I think that the hospitality industry, from what I speak to in the larger hospitality industry, they welcome the mandate because it will give them a wider thing. But it's the small cafes, coffee shop type stuff that I think is the one that's got a lot of concern around what this will be, how they go and are going to police this mandate. It's going to be tough depending on how tough the government want to be on this. I don't believe that business is just going to go out of the way, and most businesses are just not going to go out of the way and say, stuff it, I'm going to let every man and his dog come in. I think people are going to try and do the right thing, but in a rush, do you have the resources to stop and double check everybody is vaccinated? If governments come out and start finding people, at the drop of a hat, then there's going to be a lot of businesses that are really going to be in a world of pain.
Neil Coupland, it's been a most valuable insight into the property market and from a business perspective with COVID and the mandates from December 17. Thank you so much for joining Ipswich today.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
June Frank has been selling real estate in Ipswich for 31 years. Welcome to Ipswich today, June.
Thank you, Alan.
The last time we spoke, we were talking about booms in property prices in Ipswich, and I think we were talking about the early 2000s, which you said in your experience had been the biggest to date. Is the current situation surpassing the early 2000s?
Yes, it absolutely is. It's a phenomenal price rise in a short amount of time.
What do you put that down to?
So interest rates, number one, big catalyst. Number two, COVID. It has changed the landscape for what people are looking for in a home. So a lot of people are working from home now. So they want home offices because they're working from home. The kids come home from school to the house, and so they want bigger yards. more play area. And then thirdly, the Brisbane price limit is just astronomical now. But the first home buyers that would have, bought up to 900 in Brisbane are now outpriced, and they are now moving into Ipswich.
Those numbers are almost hard to get your head around, that it's gone up so quickly. So 12 months ago, what was a home selling for in Ipswich?
So I don't think we were even at 500 for median house price. Probably more like 380, but it would definitely be at least 500 now.
The REIQ has been quoted this month as saying that first home buyers account for about 3,000 homes statewide. Ipswich has long pushed the affordability mantra, but with these house prices increasing, are there still affordable houses to be found?
Look, absolutely. And I would think it would be at least 15 to 20% of my sales are first home buyers. And that's, I sold one to a lady on her own. And you just have to learn to save and, be diligent in finding a property. I think, if you look at when we bought our first home, the interest rates were 18% and they even went up to 27%. So if you're looking at 1.8, if you do the math, it's about the same payment by way of ratio to wages. The only thing is, if you buy a house now at 1.8% interest, you can still lock that in, I believe, for 4 years, live in a house and make, 300,000 tax-free for first home buyers. I think what a great opportunity. How many times in your lifetime can you live in a house which is cheaper than paying rent to give you a tax-free profit of anywhere up to 300,000? It's just mind-blowing.
You mentioned the percentage of first home buyers. Has that changed over the decades?
Look, it absolutely has. They really weren't in a hurry at all to be getting into a house. It was mostly second home purchases, upgrading, or, some investment property. But seriously now, they understand if they don't get in soon, the affordability for them, they'll miss the boat. They'll have to, I don't know where they'll buy. Even when you go out further and further, it's still not, it's still not getting any better, really. So they've come to the conclusion if they're going to get a spot in the real estate market, they need to be moving straight away.
Are people phoning you and buying houses sight unseen? Yes,
we have that. That's predominantly investment property because it's, pretty much the standard 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2 lock-up, and then they just get a building and pest, and a lot of them must, an engineer's report on the property. So it's just a clinical investment for them.
A report in the Courier Mail recently by an organisation called Christopher's Housing Boom or Bust has said that prices would continue to increase at about 8 to 14%. Can you see the same thing happening in Ipswich?
Absolutely. Well, I sold a house on Burnett Street for $1,020,000, and then in 12 months sold it for $1.3 million, which was an actual 20% increase in that particular property. So yes, no problem at all.
These numbers are mind-blowing, June. Unless you're actually in the market selling your home or buying a home, it's kind of bypassing people, although it's in the news every day. Can we come to rental properties? Because that's another story that's in the news every day. People can't afford their rent. What are low-income families doing? Are they leaving the city or finding more affordable places to live within Ipswich?
I think probably they find a lesser property than they were living in previously, for a lower rent. So what's happening with that and driving that is, a lot of people that have held property for 10, 20 years, it's starting to need upgrading, maintenance. The tenant's lease becomes due. So you've got people that have maybe been in that property for 10 or 20 years and they only gets a new price on it, 100,000 more than last time, they check with the agent. So they say, put it on the market. So then you've got one less property with another tenant out looking. So you've got a double-up effect of less property, more tenants.
So what's the current picture in Ipswich now?
0% to 0.05% vacancy rate.
And is that the tightest you've ever seen it?
We've seen it like that before. I've seen it like that in the early 90s. We used to have people queuing up at the Five-Ways. When we'd show them what they could get for their rental money, there were people burst into tears and said we could not possibly have our family live in that. And that was, that was all that was available. So I think, government might need to be looking at, more housing that they supply, for people, because it will become absolute crisis point for sure.
Well, back to new homes or new home buyers.
Yes.
Do we have any secret pockets of Ipswich where prices haven't increased as much as you've been telling us?
No, that would be no.
I had to ask.
Unless there's something owned by Rumpelstiltskin and he just woke up. Apart from that one house, no.
Well, let's talk about government incentives for first home buyers. Do you think they push new home prices up by the same amount when they're announced?
Look, it's across the board because, you can't have a particular house in the street worth more because someone's had a grant from the government. But predominantly all of that is still on new housing. It's not across the board. So they only get that first homeowners grant on new property. So in the general mainstream, of the CBD area, unless it's a new house, which is rare because there's no land available, they really have to go out to these newer, suburbs, like Ripley, etc. So, then you've got that first home buyer investment sector pretty much all in together there.
As we come to the end of the year, June, what's your crystal ball telling you for 2022? We've got a new COVID variant that's been announced that makes everybody a little jittery. Is it still going to power on in 2022? Look,
I believe so. So the unusual fact is that COVID has been very good for the real estate market, because it, once again, just a quantum change in people's life on what they think about. They're wanting bigger blocks, more space. So, all of that's still going on, but we still have the low interest rates. And even if they go up marginally, it is still the lowest interest rates we've seen in, forever. And, population continues to grow. And I think once the borders open, in particular in Queensland, because of our low COVID rate and because families have been kept apart for a couple of years, I sold 2 properties on the weekend where adult children are buying property units, small houses for their parents to move up here so they can be close to them.
Wow.
So there's here comes a whole new wave of reasons why people need to buy property. So I can't see it. And I liken it to like a tsunami. If there's a 100-foot high wall of water moving across the shoreline, it can't just stop. So we've got this, 100-foot high wall of buyers that have been displaced, that have sold something, that are financed approved. It will take a while for that to peter out and work its way through, because every time someone buys a house, that person buys another house. So
yeah, I see what you're saying.
It's a perpetual motion on what's going to happen.
And finally, can we just do a little reminiscing?
Yes.
Can you remember how much you sold your first house for and your most recent house for?
So in my first month in real estate, I sold a house for $18,000, $36,000, $28,000, then a biggie, $45,000.
Wow.
So, and my most recent was $1.2 million in Cintra Street in Eastern Heights last week.
What a story you could tell if you wrote a book, June.
Yes. Oh, well, coming, Alan.
It's coming. We'll look for it.
All right.
On that note, thanks so much for talking to Ipswich today.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Thanks, Alan.
Phillip Bell is president of the Ipswich Chamber of Commerce and also works for a major bank. So, Phil, you're wearing 2 hats today. Thanks for joining Ipswich today.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Great to be with you.
Phil, let's talk about lending. Is money still easy to get in relative terms?
Oh, not as easy, Alan. I think we've seen a bit of a tightening up, I guess, since the Royal Commission a couple of years ago. And while a lot of the responsible lending guidelines and requirements are technically easing by virtue of governments moving and acting to make things easier in the finance space, you are seeing banks across the board still maintaining pretty strict guidelines in terms of issuing finance, particularly for home and investment lending.
The Real Estate Institute of Queensland was quoted this month as saying that first home buyers account for about 3,000 homes statewide. Ipswich has long pushed the affordability mantra, but with house prices increasing, is the city still affordable for first home buyers?
I would suggest it's becoming less affordable, Alan, and it's not a challenge in terms of finding space. One of the greatest assets we have in our region is, of course, that Ipswich sits, in a beautiful corridor west of Brisbane, but also on the way to some major metropolitan centres in Toowoomba and the Gold Coast, with Logan as well. But indeed, our strength is that a lot of the land that sits around the Ipswich region is undeveloped. Now, the challenge, I guess, is to bring that land and that space onto the market and make it accessible and affordable for young buyers and first home buyers in particular. I would suggest that those numbers in terms of first home buyer percentages are a little bit low and concerningly low in terms of making homes accessible to first home buyers in particular.
Has there been discussions amongst your peers about the effects of COVID? If we go back nearly 2 years when COVID first hit our shores, did anybody predict that house prices would increase so much?
I don't think they did. The interesting thing about COVID is not so much the effect that it's had on debt finance and financing for purchasing homes, but it's also the response of the federal government providing huge amount, billions of dollars worth of support. And a lot of that JobKeeper and other support that was available, it sat in the market at call and accessible. The interesting thing about those funds now is that they've largely found a home. So those with, those investors who are cashed up have pretty much found a relevant place to invest those funds. And indeed, the other thing we're finding is that the bargains aren't available anymore to the extent that they once were. So everyone is realising that you might be able to sell your home at a premium, but you're going to have to buy somewhere else in the same market.
Is the bank, and you might like to talk more broadly here, not just your own bank, but is the bank feeling the pressure from customers to turn around approvals really quickly and get the money in their accounts?
Oh, that's absolutely one of the things we're noticing, Alan. So the days of, even a 45 to 90-day settlement are long gone. So customer expectations have come well forward. And indeed, that's a sign of a well-informed market. So buyers are actually moving and seeking to move very quickly in order to invest and in order to snap up the home that they want. So the banks and lending institutions generally are under intense pressure to turn around these finance deals in, often, no more than 30 days.
Let's look at the calendar year of 2021. Is lending up or down as the year comes to an end?
Lending is up, Alan, but it's the interesting thing is we've largely closed ourselves off to international markets. So while lending is up for many institutions, it's a function of a very closed market. So most of the lending institutions are simply stealing business off each other at the moment, where we don't have a great exposure to international investors and international markets. So those financial institutions and lenders that are finding lending growth are really doing better at capitalising upon only the domestic market.
A report in the Courier Mail this month by Christopher's Housing Boom or Bust has said that prices would continue to increase between 8 and 14%. Do you think this will continue, and are people more broadly still going to be able to afford a mortgage?
Well, I think the affordability of mortgages remains accessible. So while we've seen the banks move in advance of the Reserve Bank, indeed to push some of their mortgage rates slightly higher, what we're seeing is that house prices are continuing to steadily grow. And I think that's more a function of how slowly we can bring this vacant land and the developed land onto the market. I don't think we'll see the significant rises in house prices that we saw, say, 2 years ago when COVID-19 first became relevant. But I think house prices are going to continue to grow steadily. And the challenge for investors, of course, is to not only find a bargain, but, as I said, to find themselves a place to live in the same market.
Let's talk about government incentives for a minute for first home buyers. Do you think these incentives push new home prices up by the same or a similar amount?
I think they have had an effect, Alan. So any kind of subsidy or incentive like that makes first home buying more accessible is going to have an effect on the market. But the other interesting thing is that it really segregated the market. So it was pretty clear that when auctions occur, there's a cohort of bidders that are first home buyers and first home buyer subsidy eligible, and those who are not. So it's been a real differentiation in our local markets.
And finally, if I can get you to put your hat back on as president of the Ipswich Chamber of Commerce, have local businesses bounced back after nearly 2 years of COVID?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Alan, because indeed I'm looking forward to talking about the commercial property that we're seeing in Ipswich City. So, and that is, of course, largely a function of supply and demand. We are seeing commercial property rates continuing to maintain, very high prices, be reasonably affordable. And indeed, if people are looking for a bargain, I'd suggest some of those commercial properties that exist around our area, it might be the place to look. We're seeing tenancy rates that have not really gone backwards in the last 12 months, and indeed are starting to creep forward. So businesses are battling on, and they're doing quite well. Actually, I think as we continue to emerge through post-restriction COVID, we're going to see a nice, steady and healthy growth in our local business.
Once the borders open on December 17, do you see an increase in interest in both residential and commercial?
I do see a steady increase in residential and commercial property, Alan. I think people are more than ever well prepared, well informed, and in a great position to take advantage of some good opportunities, both in the residential and commercial property market. In particular, around the Ipswich region, there are still, while there's not as many bargains to be had, there are great investments to be made in this region. We are still sitting in the highest growth region within Queensland. And it's a fantastic place to invest. The old saying, a rising tide floats all boats. Well, we've got a lot going for us commercially in our region, Alan, and I think as a consequence, investors will be well prepared.
On that positive note, Phillip Bell from the Ipswich Chamber of Commerce, and also putting on your banking hat, thank you so much for talking to Ipswich today.
Great to talk to you. Thanks, Alan.
Ipswich Today is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. This podcast is also listener-supported. Please make a once-only gift or regular donation to help keep it online. Just go to ipswichtoday.com.au and click the donate button on the homepage to make a payment through PayPal. Follow and stream this podcast from your favourite app, including iHeartRadio and Amazon Music Podcasts, or play Ipswich Today from smart speakers. Music is supplied by Purple Planet Music. This is Alan Roebuck. Thank you for listening.